I'm a really big fan of pizza, and I've been making my own pizza crust for a long time, 15, 20 years, but it's never been really good. Like I would just always hope that the crust turned out right, and I just never really bothered to take the time to get consistent with it. I would just sort of hope that maybe this time it'll turn out all right. Well, this year has been a little bit unique, and we haven't really been able to go out to any pizza restaurants like I like to do every weekend. So I just got better at making my own pizza crust. And I think it's turned out outstanding the past 20, 30 times that I've done it. So I've had a few people ask me for the recipe, and I figured I'd just make a video and pass it on to everyone. Now, I'm not a chef. I'm just a dude who makes stuff. I think that's probably how most of us would categorize ourselves. And I also don't really measure when I'm cooking. I go off of taste, touch, the way things look, the way they feel. So that's what this recipe is. And I think that's one of the things that makes it a lot easier to follow and why I have gotten pretty consistent with the results. Some people will measure their ingredients, especially with baking and when flour is involved. They'll measure very carefully and weight and grams and sift things and level off cups, and I don't do that. I'm just going to go off of the way things look. Well, for starters, let's look at the ingredients. I have two different kinds of flour here. I can use either one. I don't really see a huge difference in the results, but I like to use bread flour because it's got a little bit of a higher protein content than the all-purpose flour, and the protein is just going to make it a little bit more stretchy. I like pizza crust to be kind of stretchy. I don't like dry crust or rigid crust. I have salt. It doesn't have to be sea salt. It can be any kind of salt. And the flour can be, I like the King Arthur brand, but you can use another brand. It just might come out a little bit differently because, all flours are made slightly differently. Just like you have different kinds of, tomatoes or apples in the store, there are, different kinds of wheat that are going to give you different kinds of flour depending on the region where they were grown and the processing. But I like the King Arthur brand, so I'm just going to keep using that. I have sugar, white sugar. This is monk sugar, but it can be any kind of white sugar. Just grab that one. Water that's room temperature, a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler, cold, it doesn't matter, as long as it's not too hot to burn the yeast. And then I got yeast. I don't get any kind of special magical yeast either. This is just the stuff that they sell in a jar at the grocery store, and it seems to work out just fine. So, and olive oil. And those are the basics. Now, I'm going to go through this whole thing at the speed that I do it. I'm not going to, cut out parts of the video to make it look like it's happening faster than it is. So the length of this video is how long it takes me to make some good pizza dough. Well, let's get started. I got the bread flour right now in here, and I'm going to go with, give or take, 3 cups or 3 scoops. I'm not leveling it out. I'm not being really careful because as I do this, I'm going to add more flour or add more water as needed to get to the right consistency. We'll see what that consistency is in a minute. Now that's pretty close to start right there. And then I'll put in a little bit of salt. I don't know, that's maybe half, quarter teaspoon? I don't know, it doesn't need to be a lot. I put some salt in there, I don't want to make it too salty. And then I'll grab maybe a teaspoon of sugar. I'm not even going to use a teaspoon. I'm just going to grab some in my hand just so you see, there's a bit of flexibility in this. I really don't want to stress about the ingredients that much, and if I put in another little toss of sugar in there, I don't think it would make a big difference in the results. And I'll dump in some olive oil. That's probably going to be about, 2, 3 tablespoons, something like that. If I put in a little bit more or a little bit less, no big deal. And then the yeast. A lot of people like to mix this in water with a little bit of sugar first, and I don't do that. I just throw it right into the dough. And this year, because yeast has been in kind of short supply, I've been a little, I used a little bit less whenever I make bread or pizza dough or whatever. This is probably about 3/4 of a teaspoon, and I think the normal amount would probably be like 1.5 or 2 teaspoons. But I've been using less, and I haven't really seen any major impact from it because the yeast is a living thing, and it's going to kind of spread out throughout that flour as it's rising. Give it a little quick premix there, and I think we got everything. Using a stand mixer for this. Not everybody has one of these. This is a KitchenAid Professional 5 Plus. We got this at like one of those fake Black Friday sales quite a few years ago. Really, they were just coming out with a newer model of this, so they sold off the old ones for cheaper. This was around $250 still, I think. You can get the smaller ones that aren't quite as powerful for, I think, around 200. I'm not sure. I haven't checked recently. And yes, that is a lot of money for a kitchen appliance. But the way I look at it, I mean, you're going to spend maybe $20, $30 just to go out to a pizza restaurant. So every time you make your own pizza using this instead of going out to a restaurant, that's really going to add up before too long, especially if you eat as much pizza as I do, because it is an every weekend thing at the minimum. So I like to have the right tool for the job. You can mix this by hand also, but I just like using the stand mixer. I think it makes it a lot faster and a lot easier. Snap that down, and then I'm going to dump in most of my water, but not all of it, because I might need to adjust this later. And again, this is important. These aren't exact amounts that I put in there. This is maybe like a cup of water, but I'm going to mix it up and see how it looks, and then I'll make adjustments later, depending on how the flour's turning out or how the dough's turning out. I love this little half spatula thing. I'll just pop it in there when it's going on slow speed like this, just to get some of the stuff off the sides. Normally it's not a good idea to stick things in a moving tool, but this is how I do it. I'm not changing anything for this video. This is how I make pizza. Now what we're looking for is a solid ball of dough that is not sticky. I don't want it to be stuck all over the sides. When I pick it up in my hand, I don't want it to stick to my hand like it was pancake batter or something. I want this to be a pretty solid ball. I also don't want it to be dry. So there's a sweet spot you got to find just by adding a little bit more water or a little bit more flour. Don't stress about it if it doesn't look right the first time. Just add a little more flour or water until it does look right. This is not a really a time-consuming process to make pizza crust. You just got to have some patience. Mostly the patience is letting it rise. I'm going to turn this up a little bit just to accelerate this. That's pretty close, but I might need a little bit more water. Yeah, maybe. We'll see. Worst case, I can add some more flour. You know, it's not going to ruin your dough if you add a little extra water, a little extra flour after it's already started mixing. I mean, we are definitely in the grace period right here, because we got flour and water, but the yeast really hasn't had enough time to really do anything yet. So, you know, this is not actually a solid ball. It's just flour particles and water that are holding it together. So if it tears, if it rips, if it breaks in half, if you mix it a little more, not going to hurt it. It'll all resolve itself as the dough is rising. That's actually looking pretty good. Now when it's the right consistency, it'll kind of clean the sides of this this mixer, the bowl here, and you know, instead of just sticking all over. If it sticks all over, it's just not going to mix right. But I like to see it kind of flopping around in there, and then I know it's just about the right consistency. That's looking pretty good. I might even give it just a touch more water. It's going to make it stick to the sides just a little bit, or smear around on the sides. That will fix itself shortly. There we go, now it's cleaning the sides off again. Now, I've heard before that some people say you shouldn't mix more than 5 minutes or 6 minutes or whatever. You should mix a minimum of 10 minutes. I don't really think it matters that much. I think as long as you get it mixed pretty well, so you can see it's a nice even consistency. If I'm talking to a woodworking crowd right now, like a lot of my viewers, if you were mixing up some paint or something, just think about like that. You mix it up so everything looks about the same color and texture and consistency, and you're probably pretty good. So you don't have uneven chunks or lumps or different colors or different levels of water absorption in the flour. Just mix it until it looks consistent. Wood putty. I think that looks pretty good right there. This might be just right. Sometimes it works out better than others. There have been times where I've had to add more flour, like 4 or 5 times, and then more water 4 or 5 times. But this is just about right. This is a nice ball. You can see it's pretty smooth. It's pretty soft. I mean, just looking at it, you can probably get an idea of the texture of this. And you can see that when I push on it, it's not just sticking all over my hands. I'm getting a little bit on there. That's natural. It's probably because I wash my hands before doing this, so my hands are a little bit dry. But this right here, this is a great ball of dough. This is going to make some great crust. And then I'll just kind of curve it around and put the seams on the bottom. I don't know if that's really absolutely necessary, but that's how I do it. I think that's how most people do it. And then once I got this ball done, I can either leave it in here, but I usually don't, just because when I'll do this in advance of maybe 5 hours before I actually want to eat the pizza. So I want to conserve space. I usually use just a Tupperware container, and all I do is drop that in there and then just set the lid on top. I don't oil it or anything. You can, it's not going to hurt it. I just I don't like doing it that way because I think it makes it harder to form it later. Some people might have a different experience with that, but yeah, I just throw it in this Tupperware container, and now all we're going to do at this point is let it sit for about 2 hours at room temperature. You can warm it up a little bit if you want to. I don't like to do that. We're just going to talk about the way that I do it. I never add any additional warming to it. I just drop it in this Tupperware container, let it sit for about 2 hours, and it will rise and get right about up to the top of this thing, roughly double in size. And once that's done, I will just beat it back down into a smaller ball and then give it about another hour. And at that point, it's pretty much ready to go. The only thing you don't want to do is leave it out for too long, because if you let this sit for more than maybe 6 hours or so at room temperature, it might start to ferment. If you open this up and it kind of smells like yeast and alcohol in there, then it's been in there too long. The alcohol will actually start to destroy it. I mean, even if you have a good ball of dough like that, if I were to leave this for about 8 or 10 hours at room temperature, I'd touch this and it would be sticky. The alcohol would be killing the yeast in there. It wouldn't rise right. It just wouldn't work quite the same. So about 2 hours, or when it's double the size, it'll rise a little bit faster if your room's warmer, your house is warmer. It'll rise a little faster if you put in more yeast. It'll rise a little faster if your water was warmer initially, but after 20-30 minutes here, everything here is going to be room temperature anyway, so it won't make a huge difference. But give it about 2 hours, punch it down, and then come back. And I think the worst of this is done, except for stretching the crust. That's always the tricky part. I made up a second batch of dough as well, just so I could do some garlic bread in addition to the pizza. And I got distracted doing some other stuff and kind of forgot about this. So this one has been rising for, I think, about 3 hours, just so you can see where that's at. That is nice and stretchy. And this one right here has been rising for about 2 hours, so it's just a little bit lower. And this is really just about what I was looking for. Nothing wrong with that right there. They're both fine. So now all I'm going to do is just pop these down in there a little bit more. Flatten it down, get the bubbles out. It's kind of stuck to the sides. If you're doing this in like a curved bottom bowl, you wouldn't really need to clean it off the sides like that, but that's just how I'm going to do it. Just get some of the bubbles out of there. And that's it. Nothing complicated. And this is still, pull it off of there. That's still really good. That is nice, good stretchy dough right there. And now I'm going to let it sit for about another hour. I got one already done, and I'm going to move on to the next one now. I think I'm just going to do 2 pizzas instead of doing garlic bread. This is the one that had been rising for, I think, 2 hours before I beat it down, and then I gave it another hour or so, and now I'm just going to beat it down again. And I'm going to spread it out on parchment paper. That's just the way that I've found to be pretty easy. Parchment paper will take some heat and keep it from sticking, so it makes the cleanup a little bit easier later. I'll just rip off a sheet of parchment paper while the oven is preheating. I'm taking it up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. I found that to be just about right for this oven, the way I do it. And then I'm going to spread some cornmeal on here. That just helps spread everything around. This is going to make a little bit of a mess, but it's better than having it stick to everything. And I think the cornmeal adds a little nice flavor to the crust. You can also use flour. I like using cornmeal. And now I just got to work this thing out into a ball again. Get it loose from the sides. If you oiled it and put it in like a stainless steel or plastic, whatever, curved bottom bowl, it'll come out a lot easier. But this is pretty easy too, as you can see. I'm just trying to get it off the edges so I don't lose any of it. And there is a nice stretchy ball of dough. It's a lot softer than it was before, but that just looks great. Yeah, this one's awesome. Slightly more sticky. And I'm going to do the same thing as before and kind of fold it around so I got all the seams on the bottom. And this will be my top. And I'm just going to start working this into a slightly larger disc. Sometimes I'll do it this way. Just kind of flop it around and get a little bit bigger, or you can just, you know, stretch it by hand like that. A lot of different ways to do this. I mean, the point is that you just get it into a pizza shape. Sometimes I use a rolling pin. I like my mini rolling pin because this lets me push it out without ruining the thicker crust around the edges, but sometimes I'll also stretch it by hand like I'm doing right now. So I'll just go around little by little till it gets just a little bit of a pizza shape. Flop it back and forth. I mean, this isn't going to break it, just going gently like that. It should be nice and stretchy as long as you had enough protein in that flour. And somewhere around here I'm rotating it as I'm doing this, just so I kind of get an even circle. And oven is up to temperature, 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I might press this out a little bit more. Now the reason that you put the parchment or the cornstarch on the parchment paper or flour or something is that otherwise, as you're kind of pushing this out, it might cause the paper to come back in and wrinkle. And sometimes it does that to me and it really just drives me nuts. But every once in a while I'll switch over to a new sheet of paper. But it makes the cleanup easier, and that's one of the reasons I do it. Also makes it easier for me to transition everything around. I keep saying I'm going to build an actual pizza peel, like for putting it in the oven and taking it out, but I've just been using this big bamboo cutting board. That's worked out pretty well. Before that, I used a piece of cardboard, and that worked out pretty well. So one of these days, I'll build myself a pizza peel. Now I got a little bit of cornstarch on both sides here. That's going to keep it from sticking. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to I might push that out a little bit more. I'm not flattening the outside. I'm leaving some crust around there. I'm gonna have that nice thick crust. But I'm just pushing it out to get it a little bit to shape. And then once I do that, I'm going to pick it up, roll it back onto my knuckles, and just start working it little by little. I'm just going to kind of let it stretch itself out there a little bit. I'm not really putting a lot of pressure on it. I'm just trying to get my knuckles up near the crust ring without ruining that nice thick ring I have on there. And I might just stretch it out just a little bit, trying not to rip it. If it does rip, you just stick it back together, no big deal. But largely I'm just kind of letting it do this under its own weight. And if the crust is good, I mean, you can see it can hang like this, no trouble. It's not just going to fall apart. Pizza crust should be, pizza dough should be stretchy. If it gets too thin, it'll rip through, but I'm going to try not to get any part too thin. I don't quite have the space or the lighting that I do in my garage workshop, so this is a little bit challenging, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing okay. I'm just getting my knuckles in there and just little by little going around that perimeter and stretching it out. I'm not putting too much effort into stretching the center because the center is going to take care of itself as long as I'm stretching the outside. Just little by little. If it starts to tear, just let up the pressure. And as you go around the perimeter, little by little, it's going to keep getting bigger. This might be getting pretty close to the size that I want. Should have turned off that dishwasher before I started this. I think we might be pretty close. Give it one more little stretch on this side. And now I'm going to drop that back onto my parchment paper. And that's a little bit uneven, but that doesn't bother me at all. And once it's down here, I can give it a little bit more stretch by hand if there's any areas around the crust that I want to get a little bit thinner or a little bit larger. This is probably something a lot of woodworkers are really well suited for, because you just watch all those little details and try to get it even. Not too even. I mean, you can roll it out with a rolling pin. You know, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a little bit more challenging to run over the crust. But you know, if you want to get it a little more even thickness, which you don't really have to do, you can use a small rolling pin to go around the edges like that. Not necessary, but it's certainly an option. All right, I think that's about right. That looks pretty good. A few spots are a little bit thinner than others. That's fine. It's just going to give it a little bit of character. It doesn't affect the taste any. I like to have some thicker parts of the crust. And now that's up to temperature, so all I got to do is put some toppings on this and we're ready to go. Now we're moving on to toppings, which is largely a matter of personal preference, but I'm just going to cover what I use for some of the basic stuff. I will start out with a layer of just some olive oil, and that's just kind of to provide a little bit of a moisture barrier and prevent that sauce from making the crust too soggy. And that's all that takes. And then I'll move on to the sauce after that. And then if you have it available, I'm a big fan of basil on pizza. Got some left over from the garden, so I'm going to put on a little bit of a layer of basil. I like to put that underneath the cheese just so it doesn't get singed too much while it's cooking. Basil isn't as good once it's burned. But you know, this is of course an optional step. Starting to run a little bit low here. I've never had too much basil on a pizza, but there we go. And then I'll move on to the cheese. Just simple mozzarella. I'm not going too crazy here. And now I got some fried bacon left over from when I made crepes this morning. That should add a nice touch. And one of the last remaining garden tomatoes. And the last remaining garden green pepper that I left out a little bit too long, and it got frozen on a cold night just recently, so it's a little bit soft, but I think that's going to be fine once it's cooked. And then if you haven't tried it before, yes, cream cheese can be a pizza topping. Cream cheese can go with everything. It's a little messy to put on, but man, is it just awesome when it comes out of the oven. I'll break off about that much there. And just break it off into chunks and just drop it over there, real nice and random. They don't have to be all the same size. Just break off chunks of cream cheese and drop it all over your pizza. Or whatever you like to put on your pizza. And a little black pepper, a little oregano, and I think this thing is ready to go into the oven. Again, I like to use this tray right here, or this cutting board. Works out pretty well with the parchment paper. Let me make sure that, yeah, I think we can see there. And I have a pizza stone inside the oven. I like to use the pizza stone. I just think I get better results. So all I got to do now is grab this thing and pull it onto my cutting board. This is not the best way. I'm going to make a pizza peel eventually, but I just haven't had the need because that works just fine right there. And probably about 8 to 10 minutes, this thing's going to be ready to eat. I should probably mention that not only do I not measure my ingredients, I don't really measure the time either. I just put it in there until it looks about right. Now, if I open this up right now, I think that still has a ways to go. I want to see a little bit of browning up on that cream cheese and the crust get a little, a little more burn spots around there. But already, I mean, that's pretty close right there. It just needs a little bit more time, I think. Yeah, that looks about right, I think. All right, to get this thing out of here, I'm just going to use this cutting board again. Now, some of you might not feel comfortable with this if it's a heavy cutting board. Like I said, I've used a piece of cardboard before, and I had the same nice, clean, square piece of cardboard left over from a box or something that I used for probably years, and it was fine because I only need it just for a second. I'm just going to grab that parchment paper, slide this out, and set it up here. And there is our pizza. And if you want to add a little extra excitement, you can brush some garlic butter around the crust. I always think that's a pretty nice touch. And there we go. Let's see what this looks like. let's get in for a closer look to see how this turned out. Yeah, that is nice and spongy. It recovers well. It stretches. That is just exactly how I wanted this to turn out. I think this is going to be great. Well, that's it. I got to go tell my wife that dinner is ready, and hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have any tips or any questions, post it down in the comments. I probably won't have any answers, but I would appreciate the tips. Thanks for watching.